Yeah. Today we're going to talk about the Bard class in Pathfinder 2nd Edition on this episode of The Local Disaster Tour Guide. Hello travelers and tourists, my name is Mark and I am the Local Disaster Tour Guide. That's right, I am a storyteller who runs a family-friendly channel. You tell that bard to stay away from my script. I will not have any inappropriate jokes in this episode. Welcome to a journey through the fantastic world of TTRPGs like Pathfinder and Starfinder. Today we are returning to my classic introduction series where we take a look at different classes in Pathfinder 2e and talk about what they bring to the table for players who might be interested in that class. And with February drawing close, what better class could we choose than the stereotypical paramour, the class that talks their way into and out of way too much trouble, the Bard. Now, I do apologize that there's been a little bit of a break in my classic introduction series. My shooting schedule has just been a little bit weird through December and January, and with a couple of family illnesses that got thrown into the mix, this series just kind of got away from me. But today we are picking back up with the standard bearer for the Occult Magic Tradition in Pathfinder 2e, the Bard class. In the history of tabletop role-playing games, the Bard is often seen as a party support class. They're often seen as a class that focuses on buffing their allies and making them better in combat, and they are typically known for being very versatile, capable of taking on a variety of roles. So, when Paizo took a shot at the Bard for Pathfinder 2e, did they stick to those themes? Or did they bring something new to the table? And if you're a player that's interested in playing a Bard, what can you expect if you take a look at this class? Now, for this series, we divide our discussion of every class into 5 specific questions. Number 1, what is the Bard? Number 2, what are the strengths of the Bard? Number 3, what are the weaknesses of the Bard? Number 4, what are the different options that I have if I want to play a Bard? And then, number 5, how can I get the most out of playing a Bard in Pathfinder 2e? We'll take a look at each of these questions in turn, and I invite everyone to join in the conversation about this class. Definitely jump down into the comments and leave your thoughts about what the Bard brings to the table and about how to get some good mileage out of the Bard in play. And I'm curious to see what your all's thoughts about the Bard as the standard bearer for Occult Magic are in Pathfinder 2e. That is one of the decisions that Paizo made that I go back and forth on, and I'm still not sure where I'm ultimately going to settle when it comes to the Bard, but I would love to hear your thoughts on that particular aspect of the class, because the Bard has gone from an offshoot of arcane magic to having their own unique tradition in Pathfinder 2e, and I do think that is an interesting point of conversation. So definitely jump in and be a part of the conversation. Let me know what your thoughts about that and other aspects of this video are. And before I dive into the video proper, please be patient with me as I remind you to do all of the YouTube stuff. Normally I save this particular part of my video towards the end, but the classic introductions videos are a little bit more involved for me to make. So if you enjoy this video, please like the video, share it. If you're not subscribed to the channel, please subscribe. All of those things help my numbers and help to feed the algorithm. Definitely leave your thoughts, be part of the conversation. All of those things help to encourage me, help to inspire me, help to feed the conversation that we're having here. So I definitely invite you to be a part of that. Also, I encourage you to check out my free Discord group. There's a link to that in the video description. And I'll go ahead and throw this out there for you. If you are interested in homebrew content, there are actually a few people on my Discord group that have been sharing a lot of their homebrew content with my community, and one of my Discord members, Improfit, actually has 2 homebrew Bard muses that you can use in addition to the official content that comes from Paizo. And I just think it's cool that my community is sharing resources and ideas with one another, so you should come check that out. Also, if you're interested in supporting this channel financially, you can check out my Patreon, which is linked in the video description as well. But with all of that out of the way, let's get started. So as I said, the first question that we discuss when it comes to any class in this series is to start by examining the role of that class. What is the Bard? And to examine that role, we break it into three sub-questions. First, we talk about the mechanical role that the Bard is designed to fill. Second, we talk about the overall complexity of the Bard for new players or people approaching the class. And then third, we talk a little bit about the key terms you need to be aware of if you decide to play a Bard. And that first concept of class role is where this conversation could go a little crazy, because historically the Bard has been a very versatile class. They often have a unique array of spells, and they can heal and enchant and use illusion magic, and they have a pretty wide selection of weapons. And the classic Bard in a lot of TTRPGs is this jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none style class. And I'll go ahead and say that Paizo has kept at least some of that in the Bard's design for Pathfinder 2e. This is a class that you can build in a number of different directions. But I want to pull back from that for a minute, and I want to start with some mechanical considerations, because one of the things that Paizo has done that I think is a low-key benefit to the Bard is they have given the Bard a little more definition than it has in most RPGs. In Pathfinder 2e, the Bard is the standard bearer for the new Occult Magic Tradition. In previous versions of the game, you had essentially two types of magic. You had arcane magic and divine magic, and then later on down the road you might get something like psionics, or in Pathfinder 1st Edition you actually got an occult magic book, but it was often stapled onto the game later in the lifespan of the edition. In Pathfinder 2e, Paizo right out of the gate said, we want occult magic to be part of this game from the word go, and in doing that they needed a class to kind of carry the banner for occult magic, and they said that's what we're going to use the Bard to do. The Bard is kind of the default class that you would pick if you wanted to use occult magic in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Whew! That's a lot, and we haven't even defined the class yet, so let's get technical. The Bard is a charisma-based, spontaneous spellcasting class that uses the Occult Tradition in Pathfinder 2e. Now, we've talked about different traditions of magic already in this series, and we've already hit arcane magic, divine magic, and primal magic, so occult magic is the last type of magic that we need to discuss in this series. Previously, we've mentioned that every tradition of magic is built around two magical essences. In the case of occult magic, the two essences that the Bard uses are spirit magic and mind magic. Now, trying to parse exactly what those two essences mean could get a little bit technical, and we don't want to dive too deep there, but what this means in terms of the schools of magic you can expect to see, with the Bard, you can expect to find a lot of divination, enchantment, illusion, and necromancy. Abjuration will be about as common as normal for other traditions, but schools like conjuration, evocation, and transmutation are not going to be very common in the Bard spell list, and as we go through this video, that division of magic for the occult tradition is going to be important in our understanding of the class, so hang on to those terms. But the Bard doesn't just introduce an entirely new tradition of magic, it also introduces something that's new at least to this series, which is the idea of spontaneous casting. All of the other spellcasting classes that we've discussed so far have been prepared spellcasters. Prepared spellcasters select which spells they want to cast at the start of each day and prepare them ahead of time. That's not how spontaneous casters work. Spontaneous casters instead have what is known as a spell repertoire. It is a collection of different spells that they know, and those spells are not assigned to specific spell slots. Instead, the Bard has several spell slots each day, And when it wants to use a first level spell slot, it can cast any first level spell it knows from its spell repertoire. There's some give and take in the benefits of this. The downside to this is you pick your spells when you level up, and you can't change that until you level up again. The bard spends a significant chunk of time in play with its spell choices locked in, but the bard has a lot of flexibility in how it uses those spells. If the bard can cast 3 first level spells per day, it could theoretically cast True Strike 3 different times on the same day if that was the best use of its spell slots. Or, more likely, it can switch between several first level spells, responding to what they need in the moment. Spontaneous casters have less flexibility in selecting spells, but more flexibility in using spells, so it's a different playstyle from the other spellcasting classes that we have seen up to this point in this series. So, the primary thing you need to know about understanding the bard's role in Pathfinder 2e is understanding that it is an occult spellcasting class. And when we get into the strengths and weaknesses, we'll dive a little more into what that means, but just know that the bard is an occult caster. From there, the bard's subclasses is where it gets a lot of the classic versatility that bards are known for. Depending on which subclass you pick, you will be able to push the bard in a number of different versatile directions, and I will say that there's a pretty good spread of options for what the bard can do. So overall, I feel like Paizo gave the bard a discernible core in the occult spellcasting tradition, but then uses the subclasses to capture that versatile feel from previous editions of the game. So now let's talk about complexity. How does this all fit together? Well, overall, I give the bard a complexity rating of 6 out of 10, just a little above average, and if I'm being honest, the complexity of the bard is mostly caught up in signature spells and compositions. I'm probably going to complain about compositions a lot in this video, so just be patient with me. So one of the good things about the bard as a spellcasting class is the spontaneous spellcasting structure of the class is actually very approachable. In my personal observations, new players tend to find spontaneous casters a lot easier to use than prepared spellcasters, mostly because prepared spellcasters have to go in and reselect spells every single day. The bard, pick what you want, that's what you got. It's a lot easier. And you don't have to try to guess, do I need 2 charm persons today or can I get away with just 1? That spontaneous flexibility in implementation also helps make the class very approachable. And if we were just going off spontaneous spellcasting, I would probably say that the bard's complexity rating is actually a 3 out of 10, a 4 out of 10. It's a pretty approachable class. But there are a couple of things that can be a little bit difficult to wrap your head around, and if you're a new player that is approaching the bard, spend some extra time really thinking about these particular class abilities. One is called signature spells. One of the restrictions on spontaneous casting is you know a spell at a certain level. So the Soothe spell, if you learn it as a first level spell, you can only cast it as a first level spell. Whereas a cleric with the Heal spell, because they are a prepared spellcaster, they can actually prepare it as a first level, second level, third level, wherever they would like to. Spontaneous casters only know spells at certain levels. Signature spells is a mechanic that is designed to help you get around this particular limitation, essentially saying that you get 1 spell per spell level that you can heighten or lower to other spell levels as you see fit. That sounds a little weird? Let's talk about what that means. The Soothe spell that I mentioned earlier is one of those spells that can potentially be more powerful if you use it at a higher spell level. A normal bard, if they know it as a first level spell, could only use it as a first level spell. But now imagine for a moment that the bard in question took Soothe as one of his signature spells at first level. Now the bard could use Soothe in a first level spell slot as normal, but could also heighten it to any other spell slot that the bard could cast freely as long as they have that spell slot available. And one of the great things about this is signature spells can be used to heighten or lower a spell freely into any spell slot that it would be eligible for. So let's just say as a bard, you wanted to take Charm as one of your first level spells, but you're going through the list and there's just several other spells that you need and you don't have enough selections. You can't fit Charm into your list. Well, what you could do is take Charm at a higher level and designate it as one of your signature spells, and then you could use it at that higher level, or drop it down and use it in a first level spell slot when it's appropriate. You get one signature spell per spell level, functionally meaning that you can have up to 10 total signature spells at the end of the game, one first level, one second level, etc., etc. You do have to pick these carefully, but it does give you more flexibility with a certain number of your spells. So it is a bit of a complex feature and you do have to think about it carefully, but it is a good feature for the class and it does help out the bard. However, the other item that makes the class more complex is one where I really just feel like somebody at Paizo looked at the bard and said, wait, this is too readable, we gotta give somebody a headache. Compositions and composition cantrips. Paizo, do you have to make things hard to read on purpose? Okay, let's talk about this. Compositions are the bard's focus spells. We've talked about focus spells in other videos in this series, and everything that has applied to focus spells before applies to the bardic focus spells. A composition is a focus spell. As a bard, you begin the game with one focus point and a composition called countersong, and you can spend a focus point to use the countersong composition whenever it might be relevant inside the game. A bard can unlock other compositions as they level up, and those compositions will also use a focus point, just like other focus spells would. And bards, just like any other class, can obtain a maximum of 3 focus points overall. Even if their total number of compositions goes above 3, they will still have that hard cap of 3. Where it gets a little bit frustrating is composition cantrips. Composition cantrips are not focus spells. Instead, they are bonus cantrips, if you will. It's like the bard gets extra cantrips that are unique to the bard and are on top of the cantrips that they pick from their occult spell list. And the game also calls these special cantrips composition cantrips, and so you end up with this messy, you have your composition focus spells and composition cantrips, and they are 2 separate mechanics. And I know from first-hand experience in running Pathfinder 2e, this does cause headaches. I really wish Paizo had given us 2 different types of terminology here, but as long as you can remember, a composition is a focus spell and uses the focus point mechanic, and composition cantrips are cantrips and follow cantrip rules. Other than that, they play as normal. Really and truthfully, apart from signature spells and the messy use of the word composition, bard is a pretty approachable class, so if you can wrap your head around those things, I don't think you'll have too much trouble. However, there is one more key term that I'd like to talk about here, and this is listed in the sidebar for the bard class in the core rulebook. That is metamagic. And metamagic is a key term we have seen previously in this series. Metamagic is a reference to special actions that you can take before casting a spell to modify the parameters of the spell in some way. A simple example is the first level bardic feat, Reach spell. You can spend an action to use the metamagic reach effect and increase the overall range of whatever spell you're about to cast. All metamagic follows this basic principle. Use the metamagic, cast a spell, modify the spell in some fashion. These are the key terms and concepts that you want to know if you're playing a bard. But let's move on to the second big question of this video, which is, what are the strengths of the bard class? And one of the primary strengths of the bard is one of their classic strengths, which is the concept of the party buffer role. Their job is to help the party be better at whatever it is they're trying to do. A classic example of this is the composition cantrip Inspire Courage. The bard can spend an action to create a 60-foot emanation for 1 round that gives all of their allies +1 to attack and damage and saves versus fear. This is a powerful and very large buff spell that the bard can just use over and over and over again because it's a cantrip. And bards have a ton of features like this. Another good example is the level 4 bard feat, Inspire Defense, which adds 1 to everyone's AC in a 60-foot emanation, and also gives them a form of damage reduction. There are some spellcasting classes that are very jealous of what bards can do as a simple, repeatable spell throughout the course of a fight. The bard has the capacity to make the entire team stronger in very flexible and customizable ways. Do you want the team to be better at marching long distances and traveling across the wilderness? Bards can do that. Do you want to make your team better at skill checks? Bards can do that. Bards have the capacity to really push what the team can do as a whole. If you like the idea of being the person who makes everyone around you better, Bard is the class for you. Your party is going to function so much better, be so much stronger, because of these simple spells and abilities that you can use as the Bard. I already hinted at the second strength of the Bard class, but I want to go ahead and point this out specifically. Inspire Courage, 1 action. Inspire Defense, 1 action. Countersong, reaction. Bards have some of the best action economy for spellcasters in Pathfinder 2e. In fact, I would argue they have the best action economy of any spellcasting class in this game. Witch is a close second, but I honestly think Bard takes the cake here because so many of their special abilities are either 1 action or a reaction. Most spellcasting abilities in this game are 2 actions. And I have mentioned with several of the casting classes how it is frustrating how few reactions they have access to. For the Bard, that's not the case. You start the game with a reaction, you start the game with 1 action options for your turn, and so many different Bard abilities as you're leveling up, so many different class feats, really allow the Bard to push their action economy and push it to greater lengths than any other class can do. Back in 2020, I was doing a hypothetical build on a Bard, and I came away with a hypothetical Bard build that had a potential 10 actions per turn in certain situations. That's insane. There are few classes in the game that can play with the action economy of Pathfinder 2e as well as the Bard, and Pathfinder 2e's action economy is one of the big selling points of the game, so the Bard is well positioned to take advantage of one of the best parts of this game. And that makes the class really good, if you ask me. But since we're talking about bardic spells and bardic abilities, let's go ahead and talk about the caster aspect of the Bard, because as I've already mentioned, Bard is the standard bearer for the Occult Magic Tradition. So in understanding the strengths of the Bard class, one of the things we need to do is we need to ask, what are the strengths of the Occult Magic Tradition? Now, one thing that's worth noting is the Occult Magic Tradition is the second largest tradition in Pathfinder 2e. The Arcane Tradition is the largest, and Occult isn't going to catch Arcane anytime soon, but the Occult Tradition does have more spells available than the Divine or Primal Traditions. So you're going to get a pretty diverse selection of spells from the Occult Tradition. However, this diverse selection is diverse within a certain band. Remember earlier I talked about how the Occult Tradition uses the spirit and mind essences, and that leads to the Occult Tradition primarily drawing from divination, enchantment, illusion, and necromancy. Functionally, what that means is, as a Bard, most of your magic is dedicated towards messing with the mind and spirit of your opponent. Bards, for the most part, do not deal direct damage, but rather they mess with their opponent's minds. they charm them, they frighten them, or they buff their ally in a very powerful way. A simple way of saying it is, bardic magic is the magic of mind games. If you want to mess with your opponent's mind, Bard is hands down the best class in this game. They're going to have more options for toying with the mind and heart of their enemies than any other spellcasting class. And, wrapping around to something that we mentioned in section 1 of this video, Bards are a charisma-based spellcasting class, which means this whole concept of toying with the minds and emotions of your enemies, that's actually something that a Bard is good at, even on just a skill-based level. They are going to have high charisma, which means that skills like deception and diplomacy are going to be natural strengths for them. A Bard's social game and a Bard's mind game are top tier in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Now, it is worth noting that the Bard doesn't have quite the skill game of the Rogue or the Investigator, but Bards are still very versatile, they still have plenty of options, and a Bard that doesn't really invest in intelligence all that much is still going to start the game with roughly half of the skills available to them. So as a Bard, you definitely have the freedom to bring a very solid social game and mind game to the fore through your skills, through your spells, through your use of occult magic. Now, there are other potential strengths of the Bard, but that kind of goes into the versatility that's going to go into the subclass options. So we'll save the rest of that for section 4, but that's a pretty good glimpse at the strengths of the Bard class. But now I want to move on to the third major question of this video, which is, what are the weaknesses of the Bard class? And one of them is going to be kind of the other side of the coin from a strength that we just got done discussing, the caster nature of the Bard class. Paizo has decided to make the Bard a dedicated caster. It is the standard bearer for the Occult Magic Tradition. And that does mean that casting is a significant part of who you are and what your character does. And as we mentioned, with the spirit and mind essences for the Occult Tradition, you are really, really good at mind games. And not very good at direct damage output. So, one of the conversations that surrounds Pathfinder 2e is about spellcasters inside of Pathfinder 2e, and there is a lot of conversation about how spellcasters often feel less effective than martial characters. Now, I personally have done some videos talking about why I do not think that spellcasting is too weak in Pathfinder 2e. Here's an example if you need it. But I do understand that people often feel like spellcasters struggle, and one of the big reasons why it really applies to Bards. If you've seen some of my conversations around spellcasting, one of the things I say is spellcasters are more effective when you learn to target different defenses for an enemy, targeting their AC, their fortitude, their reflex, or their will, as the case may be. As a Bard, you're really good if your enemy's will score isn't that good. But if you're going up against an enemy that has a good will save, your magic is not going to be nearly as effective. And Bards do have necromancy as one of the types of magic that they can access, which does give them some damaging options and some versatility in the types of attacks that they can use. But quite often, creatures that are resistant to necromancy are also resistant to mental attacks. Meaning that in some cases, the offense of the Bard class is just going to fall flat. Now, in those instances, you can still buff your team, you can still help your allies, you probably still have some healing options, you certainly will still have ways to contribute to what your party is doing, but just be aware that of the spellcasting classes in Pathfinder 2e, Bard is probably the class that has the highest likelihood of running into particularly frustrating fights if their spell selection doesn't line up well against the enemies. It can happen to all spellcasters sometimes, but I feel like Bards are a little more prone to this problem, and you just need to be aware of that going in. There are going to be some fights where really and truly improving your team is going to need to be your main thing. The other potential complication with the Bard is the reverse of something we've already mentioned. Bards are often referred to as a jack of all trades and master of none, and that description is still applicable to an extent in Pathfinder 2e. The subclasses of the Bard do give you a lot of versatility. You can take your Bard in a number of different directions. I think they've got a stronger core than previous games, but there's still a lot of versatility here. Versatility is good, but it can also be dangerous. We've mentioned this in a few of the previous classes in this series, MAD, Multiple Attribute Dependency. If you get a class that needs a lot of different attributes to be effective, you can end up in a situation where your build is stretched so thin that you're not really doing anything well. So with the Bard, and I'll go ahead and say as kind of a warning for one of the muses, the Warrior Muse we'll talk about in the next section, there are certain builds where you might end up saying, oh, I need to be able to do everything, and if you try to do everything, you're probably going to end up frustrated and feel like you're not really accomplishing anything. So it doesn't happen to all bards. There are certainly plenty of bards that can maintain focus and can really keep to their core strengths and do that well. But if you aren't careful, you can try to take a bard too many ways at once, and that can lead to frustrating gameplay. But let's go ahead and talk about the different options that you have for the bard. Now, I'm not going to dive into every single class feat. I'm not going to dive into every single spell. This video is already super long. But the way we tend to approach a discussion of options for classes is to take a look at the options for subclasses that Paizo gives us. And for the Bard, we have 4 distinct subclasses that Paizo has offered. 3 in the core rulebook and 1 in the Advanced Player's Guide. I strongly suspect that when Dark Archives comes out later this year, that there will probably be another subclass made available, and this video will officially be out of date, but as of right now, we got 4 to work with. In each case, the Bard subclasses are referred to as muses, and they represent different things that inspire your character in the performances that they create. So maybe your character has been inspired by a creature. Maybe they literally heard an angel sing, or maybe they got to play a game of riddles with a sphinx. Or it is possible that your bard encountered some work of art that just left a deep impact on them creatively. As a bard, you get to spend some time thinking through what inspires you, and I feel like I'm almost selling this particular class feature short because the storytelling potential of this phrase, what inspires you, is such good storytelling potential. If you're playing a bard, don't skip out on asking the question, where does my inspiration come from? But regardless of your source of inspiration, Paizo gives you 4 different types of muses that you can use that are going to affect the magic that you have available. First up is the Enigma Muse. And the Enigma Muse represents the bard who has been inspired by mysteries and riddles and the unknowns of the world around them. Maybe you had an encounter with a creature and you haven't quite worked out what that creature was or what their purpose was. Or maybe you encountered a puzzle or a mystery or a riddle that sent your mind spinning in 1,000 creative directions. The Enigma Bard is functionally the lore-focused version of the Bard in Pathfinder 2e. You will find a lot of options for using lore skills, and you'll find a lot of options for making use of the recall knowledge action. If you really enjoy being able to bring useful information to the table, the Enigma Muse is a powerful choice for you. Selecting this muse will add the spell True Strike to your character's spell repertoire, and it will give you access to the Bardic Lore feat. Bardic Lore is basically a lore skill that can apply to anything. This is Paizo's take on the classic Bard ability. You have a unique lore skill that, rather than being focused on one topic, is broadly applicable to any topic, representing your character's ability to gather information from just a myriad of sources. Now, the Bardic Lore skill will follow some special rules on how it advances and how you can improve it. It can't be improved by a normal skill progression, but The sheer versatility of this skill is powerful, and you will definitely have opportunities to use it. The second muse that's available is the Maestro Muse, and it represents, I guess you could say, the most purely artistic version of the bard. A Maestro Muse represents the epitome of a particular craft or particular style of performance. These are paintings or musical works that last for centuries, such as the Sistine Chapel or the Messiah. This would be an encounter with a person or a creature whose artistry is so beyond the normal mortal artistry that it leaves an impact on you and leaves you as a bard with a desire to replicate the incredible beauty or talent or intricacy that you have seen in those performances. Mechanically, the Maestro Bard is very focused on the party buffing aspect of the Bard class. It's almost like they double down on this particular part of the class. You add the Soothe spell to your spell repertoire, which is a healing spell that also buffs your ally against potential mental effects. And then you also get the Lingering Composition Bard feat, which allows you to attempt a performance check and potentially spend a focus point to make one of your composition cantrips, like Inspire Courage, last multiple rounds instead of just being used for a single round. This can potentially allow you to spend one action to create a powerful buff that's going to last for multiple rounds, further enhancing not just your party's effectiveness, but also the action economy that you were already really good at. The next muse that you can select is called the Polymath Muse, and this might be the muse where Paizo had the hardest time settling on exactly what they wanted to do, because I feel like this is where they kind of tried to push versatility even further with the Bard class. The Polymath is really that jack-of-all-trades style of Bard play, and one of the things that they do here is they really try to make it where you just do more with your skills. A good picture of this is the Versatile Performance class feat, which allows you to use the performance skill to cover certain aspects of diplomacy, certain aspects of intimidation, and certain aspects of deception. It doesn't allow performance to cover every part of all of those skills, but can allow performance to cover a variety of different social interactions, essentially making one of your skills a lot more versatile. And because you have one skill that can do so much, it allows you more freedom in where you put the other skills that your character can use. So the Polymath ends up with a lot of skill variety at their disposal. And I want to go ahead and say this. You'll notice that the skills I mentioned in those examples, performance, deception, diplomacy, intimidation, all of those are charisma based. So bear in mind that even with this version of the Bard, the Polymath Muse is still a very charisma focused class, and is still going to be a very charisma focused build. You can definitely diversify into other skills very easily with this, but just be aware that the game is still kind of nudging you in the direction of making good use of your charisma score. The bonus spell for your spell repertoire as a Polymath is the Unseen Servant spell, which gives you a little invisible servant that can perform basic actions like carrying a tray or moving a chair. It's not capable of making an attack, and it doesn't have great stats, but having a little invisible buddy that you can send out to perform actions for you, there's a lot of utility in that. The final muse that Paizo has given us for the Bard is the Warrior Muse, and it comes from the Advanced Player's Guide, so you'll need access to the APG if you want to check it out. And the overall function of the Warrior Muse is to expand the weapons that the Bard has access to. The Warrior Muse adds fear to its spell repertoire and gains the Martial Performance feat, which allows the Bard to be trained in all martial weapons, and later, when it becomes an expert in weapons, it becomes an expert in those martial weapons as well. By the way, if you've seen my shorts video on the Ancestry weapon trait, Bard is one of those classes that can actually benefit from Ancestry weapons. If your character's Ancestry has some particularly potent advanced weapons, it might be worth taking some of the Ancestry weapon feats to treat those weapons as martial weapons instead, giving you a Bard with access to a particularly potent option in combat. Now there is a little bit of a caveat that I need to point out here. Remember in section 3 of this video I said that the Bard has the potential to become a multiple attribute dependent class, and the Warrior Bard is the version of the Bard that is the most prone to this particular excess. Combat-oriented characters often consider strength, dexterity, and constitution to be critical, but you're already a class that's going to be investing very heavily in charisma, and trying to divide up between 4 stats could stretch you too thin. So if you decide to go for a Warrior Bard, just keep in mind which stats are the most important for what you are trying to do, and don't try to branch out too broadly, or you could stretch your character too thin. Also keep in mind that even though you're being referred to as a Warrior Muse Bard, your weapon proficiency goes to Expert, your spell proficiency goes to Legendary. You are still primarily a caster, you're just a caster with more weapon options available. But okay, now we come to the last question in this video, which is, how can I get the most out of the Bard? So we've already talked about this at several points in this video, but the core of getting the most out of the Bard is recognizing that the Bard is built around team play more than probably any other class in this game. Your compositions and composition cantrips, your spells, there are a multitude of features that the Bard has that is all about how can I make my team better. And on top of that, the versatile nature of the Bard means that if your team is weak in a particular area, you can often come in and through your subclass choices and through your spell choices kind of fill whatever niche your team might be missing. The Bard is all about making a team more effective, and that means the core of getting the most out of the Bard in play is teamwork. Which kind of means, if you want to get the most out of the Bard, we need to talk about something other than your character sheet. Or at least, the character sheet doesn't need to be the focus of the conversation. The measure of how well your Bard is played and the measure of how much you enjoy your Bard is probably going to be determined by your interactions with the other players at your table, with the other characters in the game. And that means you're going to need to be good at communicating out of character. You're going to need to be good at talking to the other players in your group at your table and really communicating with them about what they want to do as a team, what their strengths are, what their goals are, and how you, as a Bard, can best position yourself to support your team. Let's take an easy example. Your spell selection. Bards are spontaneous casters. Prepared casters have the benefit that they can change their spells each and every day to suit whatever situation they're in. However, as a spontaneous caster, your spell selection is set and you can only change it at certain points, such as when you level up. That means the spells that you select are very important, and if you pick your spells poorly, you're probably not going to have a good time at the table. You want to have some serious conversations with your group and find out what tactics is the fighter planning on using? What spells will the druid be picking up? Is your party going to prefer stealth-based strategies? Or are they the kind of party that wants to kick in the door and charge problems head on? Choosing your spells to support the playstyle of your team is going to be very critical to feeling like you didn't waste your spell picks. And there are a lot of great Bard spells that wouldn't feel very great if they're not matched up to the correct team, so that communication out of game is going to transfer to the experience you have in game. Now, one of the great things about the Bard's design is the overall versatility of the class, but that also means that you do want to consider what your team is well prepared for and what areas you can help fill in gaps for your team. You can go a lot of different directions with the Bard, but let me encourage you, branch out intentionally when it comes to the skills, the feats, the spells that you select. If you discover that your team is not going to be very good at recall knowledge checks, then the Enigma Muse might be a really good choice, and even if it's not your main muse, you could take a class feat that lets you pick it up as a secondary option. Access to something like Bardic Lore would be really strong in a party that doesn't have a lot of strength in regards to recall knowledge actions. By the same token, if you have a party that is very focused on spellcasting, picking up something like the Warrior Muse and then maybe the Shield Block feat could give your party just a little bit extra durability to help offset the heavy casting focus that your party might have. Talking to other players, finding out what their strengths are, and finding out how you can complement those strengths is really going to go a long way. One last thing to talk about here is charisma skills and, to an extent, knowledge skills. You cannot play the skill game nearly as well as a rogue or as an investigator, but you are pretty well positioned, and arguably it could be said that you're the third or fourth strongest skill character in the game. And when it comes to charisma skills, you are naturally one of the strongest classes, but bear in mind that there are several charisma skills. We've mentioned performance, diplomacy, deception, intimidation. There's a lot of different ways charisma skills can go, and as a bard, don't feel like you have to do all of them. It is perfectly acceptable to say, my bard is going to focus on performance and deception, and I'm going to let the barbarian take intimidation. Or I'm going to let the cleric cover diplomacy. Listen to the skill choices that your party plans to use, and then ask, what skill choices can I take to make sure that I am filling out the needs of this group? As the bard, you have the flexibility to do that, so take advantage of that flexibility, see what your team is doing, and ask, how can I best support them? Overall, with the bard, as long as you're intentional, as long as you're communicating well with the other players at your table and with the other characters inside the game, I think that bard is a really strong class, and I do appreciate that Paizo has taken the time to give the bard a solid core in the occult magic tradition. Now, I didn't talk about it earlier because this is a little bit of a tangent. Occult magic in Pathfinder 2e, according to Secrets of Magic, is a system of magic that is all about the emotion and meaning of the magic. So occult magic is not the kind of magic that works because you use the right words or make the right symbols, but rather it is a type of magic that works because what those words and symbols mean to you as a caster. This is an interesting direction for occult magic, and it does put me a little more at ease with the flavor and purpose of the bard inside of the game. It is still probably going to take me a while to get used to the exact way that Paizo has developed the bard and intends to use the bard in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, but I do acknowledge that this class is well positioned. You have a brand new tradition of magic that has been incorporated from the very start of the game, and you have a class that has been designed to take advantage of this style of magic. I definitely think the bard has a lot of strengths, and let me just say, if you like Pathfinder 2e's action economy, bard rocks on that front. It really does. It is crazy what you can do with the bard. But those are my thoughts. Let me turn the conversation over to you. What are your thoughts about the bard in Pathfinder 2e? Do you agree with my assessment? Are there strengths of the bard that I've overlooked, or are there weaknesses that I failed to mention? Are there different aspects of play that you feel I should have pointed out? And do you have tips or suggestions for players who are interested in using a bard in their games? Leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. And as I said earlier, while you're down there, check out my Discord and my Patreon. And don't forget to go over to Team Player Gaming and check out some of their videos as well. If you enjoyed this video, like it, share it, subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for being a part of the conversation, and have a wonderful day.